Louisiana Eats is brought to you with support from Louisiana Fish Fry, a staple of Louisiana kitchens for nearly 40 years. Maker of batters, coatings, boils, tartar sauce, cocktail sauce, and more. Dig into homemade Louisiana flavor. From our studios in the Southern Food and Beverage Museum in New Orleans, this is Louisiana Eats. I'm Poppy Tooker. Food and law. That's a huge topic that's not as dry as you might expect, especially when it comes to liquor and law. On this week's Louisiana Eats, we'll hear from our resident food lawyer, founder of the Southern Food and Beverage Museum, Liz Williams. Liz demystifies just what life as a food lawyer might be like and discusses her personal experience with the topic. Then, we bring in the big guns from the Pentagon. Philip Greene serves as Trademark and Internet Counsel for the U.S. Marine Corps, based in the Pentagon. He'll demystify what constitutes intellectual property that can be legally protected. And Dylan Lintern, president and COO of NOLA Brewing Company, joins us with a harrowing tale of legal troubles so big that Godzilla himself played a major role. After we're done with great big lizards, we'll deal with green fairies, the sort that people used to believe were invoked by drinking absinthe, and the legal actions it took to make absinthe legal again in the U.S. We'll see you in food court on this week's Louisiana Eats. During the pandemic, sales of alcohol have spiked as Americans have been doing their drinking at home. Necessity is the mother of invention, and self-isolation has made amateur mixologists out of a lot of us. So imagine you're stuck at home, peering into your liquor cabinet, when you get the inspiration to create your own specialty cocktail. A little vermouth here, a dash of bitters there, a strange mixture of discoveries from the back of the refrigerator. As weeks wear on, you perfect your house cocktail recipe. Triumphant, you christen your boozy brainchild Pandemic Punch. But what if, drunk with pride as you quaff this refreshing cocktail on your porch, you recklessly reveal the ingredients to your nosy neighbor? Then, when bars open again, you head straight to your corner pub to celebrate, only to discover your nefarious neighbor is there, slinging your pandemic punch for fame and profit. The nerve! Next time, before you spill your secrets, consider protecting your intellectual property. That's what the folks behind the Dark and Stormy cocktail did. If a bar sells Dark and Stormies using anything other than Gosling's Black Seal rum and ginger beer, they can be sued by Gosling Brothers Limited. Trademarks, copyrights, and patents all provide a legal safeguard against would-be copycats hoping to cash in on your ideas. To learn more, we sat down with attorney and cocktail historian Philip Greene. As a descendant of the inventor of the Sazerac, Antoine Peychaud, Philip's got cocktails in his blood. He's a founding member of the Museum of the American Cocktail and has written several books on the history of the high-proof drink. For his day job, Philip serves as Trademark and Internet Counsel for the U.S. Marine Corps, based in the Pentagon. When we spoke, Philip began by explaining the 4 primary forms of intellectual property that can be legally protected and the differences between them.
Just sort of stepping back as an overview, you have trademarks which protect brands, logos, names, copyright which protects literary works or songs or sculpture or works of art, things like that. Patents cover invention, so design patents or regular patents that would cover distinctive glassware or barware or shakers or things like that. And then that fourth category I mentioned is trade secrets. So what's in Benedictine? Well, it's a secret.
Let's talk about the dark and stormy, because this seems so confusing to me. I can walk into any bar in the entire French Quarter for sure and order a dark and stormy, and somebody's going to give me a dark rum and ginger beer. If I'm lucky, a spicy ginger beer. How in the world can they enforce a trademark like that?
See, that's the double-edged sword that a brand owner is faced with. Is it worth all the trouble that they're going to have to go through and all the infringement that's going to be out there? It's kind of like Rolex. Fake Rolexes are being sold as we speak. Fake Gucci handbags are being sold out of trunks of cars or, sidewalk vendors. It comes with the territory, and you have to police your mark. In a perfect world, in the eyes of Gosling's rum, there are companies using or serving dark and stormies, and they're maybe under an informal license. As long as they're using Gosling's Black Seal rum and maybe Barrett's ginger beer, it's all good. They don't need to be paying a royalty. But if they're not, if they're using Myers rum or some other dark rum, maybe they're going to be getting a cease and desist letter from Gosling's at a certain point. I wrote a book about Ernest Hemingway, and the Hemingway family is very vigilant about protecting the Hemingway name. And if there are Hemingway-themed bars and restaurants out there, and the Hemingway family finds out about it, they have a licensing company, they're going to say, you really need to be licensed. You shouldn't be trading off of the name because it's protected by trademark. So now down the street here, there's a bar called Tropical Isle, and they have a trademark on the name Hand Grenade, and they, I think, also have a design patent on the distinctive neon green plastic hand grenade, and they've successfully filed lawsuits against imitators. Now, there's such a thing as fair use in trademarks or comparative advertising. I could make a drink and call it something else and say this is inspired by the dark and stormy. I could give it a different name, and it's kind of like buying generic ibuprofen, and it might say on the box same active ingredient as Advil. So they're using the other person's trademark in a descriptive way. So it's not infringement if I come up with my own name for a drink that has a ginger and dark rum and lime, profile, and call it something else and say this is my tribute to the dark and stormy, and that would not be infringement.
Let's say you're just an average Joe who has a bar and you're serving dark and stormies. If you were to have to pay a licensing fee in order to be able to sell that drink, I would think that this would be confusing for, as someone in a small business. I
think the Pussers of the world, the Goslings of the world, are going to be okay. They're not looking for a royalty. They just want you to use their brand. That's the royalty. They want you to, if you're making a dark and stormy, they want it to be made the way they want you to make it with their brands. And that's probably the end of the conversation. They're not expecting you to enter into a formal trademark license agreement and pay royalties on every one you sell, because that would probably drive away business. People would just say, well, hell with that. I don't need, ain't nobody got time for that. So I think just using the required products is going to be enough for the brand owner.
Are there parallels that you find in the food industry?
Well, certainly you wouldn't go into McDonald's and think of ordering a Whopper. In the drink world, and I guess in the food industry too, you have dishes like red beans and rice that no one would ever think is trademarked, and of course it isn't. And you have drink names that have been around so long, Manhattan, Martini, Daiquiri. Now, see, the problem with the last two I just mentioned is the name doesn't mean anything anymore. Let's go get a martini. And it should be gin and dry vermouth and maybe orange bitters. But restaurants, bars will have their way with that term, just like daiquiri.
As did James Bond.
Well, but he called it the Vesper, right? But different drink names have lost their integrity because they're used indiscriminately. The Mai Tai. The Mai Tai is a classic drink invented in the 1930s by Trader Vic, and it should be made in a certain way, but people will just use that name liberally on any tropical drink. And I went to an event out in San Diego a few years ago, and they proudly said, we don't have any non-alcoholic ingredients in our Mai Tai. Well, then it's not a Mai Tai. But try telling them that. They don't think that way. But yeah, you wouldn't make your own hamburger and call it a Big Mac, and because you'd know, well, no, this is not a Big Mac. But it just doesn't happen in the drinks world as often as it should.
I would love for you to sort of walk my listeners through this, because I tell people this all the time when they're like, oh, well, your published cookbooks aren't. No, just because it's in my cookbook doesn't mean that I own that red beans and rice recipe.
Right. The basic public policy position on that is that you can't copyright facts. And 2 ounces of rum and 1 ounce of lime juice and half an ounce of sugar, that's a recipe, and it's just a factual recitation of the composition of that drink. And if it's 2 cups of rice and 3 bay leaves and whatever you're using for the roux or what have you, that might be unique and distinctive to you. But as soon as you publish it, it's out there and other people can make it. Now, the only way you could copyright a recipe is if you were to fold it into a poem, but then you're only the poem is roses are red, violet. That's that you could arguably copyright that, but not the facts within it. So it wouldn't really get you anywhere. Now, where you might be able to protect a recipe is don't publish it. Consider it a trade secret. That's a double-edged sword also, because some of the great tiki bartenders, Trader Vic and Don the Beachcomber, they treated their recipes as trade secrets. They would say, to make this drink, bartenders, you're going to use 2 ounces out of bottle number 1 and 3 ounces of bottle number 2, and nobody but the owner knew what was in those bottles. So that's fine, but they weren't as vigilant about protecting the names. So Zombie and Mai Tai got bastardized, and those names didn't mean anything, even though that specific recipe was protected only because it was secret.
What does it cost approximately to successfully get a trademark on something?
To file a trademark application is fairly inexpensive. It's in the $200 to $300 range. I think it's $275 if you file electronically, or $325. But it's around $300. And what you would do is, let's say you come up with a cool name for a drink, and you would just send in a copy of the menu where the drink is shown, and you would say, I've been using this drink name in commerce since March 5th, 2015. And they would do, the trademark examiner who was assigned to the case would do a trademark search to determine whether anyone has ever used that name or a similar name. And it might take 6, 8, 10 months, and you'd get your trademark registration. So then now you have the responsibility of owning that name. And when you find out that the bar down the street's selling their own version of it, then you have to enforce it. So if everyone is infringing your trademark, eventually it can lapse. People can say, look, you haven't taken care of it. It's fallen into the public domain, and they can thumb their nose at you. That's it's kind of like when you don't take care of your property and the tax bills just keep coming in. Someone else can come in and establish adverse possession or squatter's rights. Same sort of thing.
Thank you, Philip.
Oh, thank you
so much for your time. It was an honor to meet you.
Same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Philip Greene, attorney, writer, and the Trademark and Internet Counsel to the U.S. Marine Corps. Philip's also a founding member of the Museum of the American Cocktail.
We're standing provisions of clauses 1, 2, 3, and 4. Extend contractual period, me and you forevermore. You're the legal man, you've got to prove that you're no lie. I'll render services that you may reasonably require.
One of the hallmarks of small craft breweries is their ability to come up with fun, playful names for their beers. In Shreveport, Great Raft Brewing offers a black lager called Reasonably Corrupt, a tongue-in-cheek jab at Louisiana politics. In Hammond, Gnarly Barley Brewing makes an IPA called Hoppopotamus, which presents hippo-sized notes of orange, grapefruit, and lemon. But you've got to be careful. Even the most innocuous-sounding name can get you in a heap of legal trouble. Our friends at NOLA Brewing learned that the hard way when they found themselves in a trademark infringement dispute with lawyers representing a huge Japanese client. A real monster, in fact. President and COO Dylan Lintern tells us the story.
Hey, I'm Dylan Lintern with NOLA Brewing Company, and we make a beer called Hoppyright Infringement.
Dylan, how did Hoppyright Infringement get its name?
All right, we'll have to rewind and start from the beginning on that one because it's a little bit of a story there, which is kind of fun and a little bit different. Our brewmaster, Petey Cardue, has been brewing the first batch of beer he brewed was the day John Lennon died, so he's been brewing that long. He has been known in the industry forever as Hopzilla. That's his nickname. It's on his shirts. So we kind of did a tribute to him and everything he's accomplished in the brewing world and came out with our first double IPA, and we called it Mecha Hopzilla. We named it Mecha Hopzilla after the mechanical version of Godzilla in the movies. We thought it was hilarious. The can design was the mechanical Hopzilla climbing on top of all the buildings in New Orleans. The Plaza building was there. The Superdome was there. He's biting into a hop cone. It's dripping all over the city. And the same thing with the tap handle. It kind of mimicked that can. And it was really cool. Everything was going great. We had this great tap handle design, this great can design, and about a year into the project, we got a cease and desist letter straight from Japan, from Toho Inc., which is creators of Godzilla the movie. So it was an international cease and desist. It was going to go straight to federal court because it was international.
Ouch.
So we're like, oops. Wow, we upset the Godzilla. It really wasn't until we filed for a trademark until they even knew our product existed. So that's how we got caught. We kind of got ourselves caught there. We filed for trademark, and they have a little, anything that comes up with the word Zilla, and it dings them, and they see it, and they come after them. And they've won almost every single case they've ever gone after, except for one. I think it was Glad Trash Bags makes Bagzilla. It was the only one who's ever beat them.
Yeah, but I can't imagine that NOLA Brewing had the...
We don't have that Glad Trash Bag money. No, we don't. There's protection on things like this. It's called parody, and you're allowed to parody certain products and certain images. There's other breweries that make beer called Hopzilla and things that are similar nature, but they were claiming our tap handle looked like a toy. Was the biggest problem that they had with us. So they couldn't really protect the image. They couldn't really protect the name because both of those were parodies. The actual thing they got us on was that our tap handle looked like a toy.
So you get this cease and desist order. Then what happens?
We had the cease and desist, and then we just kind of ignored it for a while, honestly. We said, I don't know. Are they serious? I don't think no. They just kind of wanted to flex their muscles. Who knows? But then we got a follow-up a few months later saying, did you get our cease and desist? Like, yeah, we sure did. So at that point, we went to our lawyers. We had just gotten intellectual property insurance, which was I don't know how, we just got it the year before. So now our intellectual property insurance covered us to go to fight this with a legal battle. So we would pay for our legal fees and all that stuff. So we said, all right, we'll at least explore it. Because if we didn't have IV insurance, we probably weren't going to fight it. We probably just rolled over right then. So we actually had a team of lawyers work on it for almost 9 months. And they were claiming the parody law, and there was a lot of stuff going back and forth. They had a team of 12 lawyers come in from Japan. They ended up coming in and seizing our computers and taking them all. This was them just looking for evidence that we actually did try to make it look like them. And so they came in and said, all right, sorry, we're going to have to take all your computers. We're going to go through them. They had a warrant, all that stuff. So we're like, okay, this is getting real serious real fast. We're like, oh my God. We're just trying to make beer over here. They just went looking through every single email and looking through every single thing that we did, and they kind of caught us pretty red-handed there. There's an email to our tap handle company that said, "I want it to look just like Godzilla." so we're like, oh boy, I guess we did say that. And then I had to sit there a 6-hour deposition, and they deposed me pretty hard, asking me the same questions over and over again, trying to catch me and trying to trip me up. And obviously, my favorite answer of the day was, I don't recall. Obviously, at the end of the day, our lawyers still thought we had a pretty good case because it still is a parody. It's not like we took any of their materials and are trying to make money off of. There is protection under parody law. So our lawyer still is like, yeah, we probably have a good shot here. It's 50-50, maybe 60-40 us. But then we read the small print there on our IP insurance, and if we lost, we would have to pay all their legal fees too, which were over $1 million at the time. So we're like, oh, I'm not going to roll the dice on that. And at that point, we just kind of rolled over and said, all right, we're done. We're gonna give in. We're gonna change the name. What do we need to do? They were actually very nice and let us, go through all of our inventory of product. We still had a bunch of empty cans that we hadn't used yet. They said, you can finish that out. When it's done, then you got to change the name. So they kind of worked with us in the end, and we're kind of nice enough to not just, that would have cost us a ton of money to throw all that inventory away, and they didn't make us do that. And that's when we changed the name at that point to Mecca. The beer was called Mecca Hopzilla, but out in the market, people who love the beer, their nickname for it, they just called it Mecca. Let me get a Mecca. So we just dropped the Hopzilla at that point. We had to change a little bit of the coloring on the cans and even on the tap handle. And then we had to get approval from Toho Inc. on that before we could release it. So we did all the sketches, we made all the changes, then we had to send it to the lawyers and they approved it. So after we changed to Mecca, we let that ride for a few years. But at that time, the industry was kind of changing, and the style of IPA that the consumer want was changing. So we decided to come up with a brand new double IPA. So we kind of scratched the recipe from Mecca, creating a new recipe, going a different direction. So we wanted to get off of the whole Mecca theme, but kind of have a nod to it as well. And so we changed it to Hoppyright Infringement. So this was our kind of, way to say, all right, Toho, we're going to roll over, we're going to change it completely, but we're not going to let you, not have a jab at you at least. Hoppyright Infringement has done better than both Mecca and Mecca Hopzilla ever did. So it has become a staple of our brand. We've won multiple awards with it. We won a gold medal last year for Best Double IPA in the country at the Best of Craft Beer Awards. It's one of my favorite beers. It's a house favorite of all of our employees. I couldn't be prouder of that product, which took us almost 2 years to develop as well.
I love a happy ending.
Yeah, and a little jab too. It's like really us versus Godzilla.
That was Dylan Lintern of NOLA Brewing. Their Hoppyright Infringement Double IPA is available for curbside pickup, or you can sample it while enjoying a meal in their tap room on Chapatula Street in New Orleans.
You serve me and I'll serve you. Swing your partners over there too. Bring your lawyer and I'll bring mine. Get together, we could have a bad time.
Coming up next, we talk with lawyer and SoFab founder Liz Williams, who shares with us her interest in the intersection of food and law. Louisiana Eats returns after the break.
We're gonna play the Sue Me, Sue You blues. We're gonna play the Sue Me, Sue You.
I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats, edible content for Louisiana food lovers. Louisiana Eats is brought to you with major support from Camellia Brand, beans done right, a New Orleans tradition since 1923, and from the Napoleon House in New Orleans French Quarter, now offering dine-in and curbside takeout. Tuesday through Saturday, including muffaladas, gumbo, frozen Pim's cups, and more. They may be reached at napoleonhouse.com and at 504-524-9752.
My name is Liz Williams. I am a lawyer, and I am very interested in the place where food and law intersect.
After earning her Juris Doctorate at LSU Law School, Liz Williams had a long career in the military as a JAG attorney. In 2004, she embarked on a new chapter in her life, founding and opening the Southern Food and Beverage Museum. Liz joined us to discuss her interest in the intersection between food and law. Well, you even wrote a pretty serious book about that, didn't you, Liz?
That's right. Stephanie Carter and I put together a book, 2 volumes, called The A to Z Encyclopedia of Food Controversies and the Law. And we tried to cover the waterfront in terms of all the different ways that food and law come together.
Give me some examples of what those ways are.
Well, one that I think is interesting to people, and it's still a little bit raging, has to do with the sale of raw milk, for example. There are many places where selling raw milk is illegal, and yet there are exceptions. If you go directly to the farm, you can buy raw milk. And there are all these rules about raw milk cheeses and how old they have to be, whether they're made in the United States or if they're imported. And there are a lot of people who believe that if you know the cows, that you should be able to choose to drink raw milk that hasn't been pasteurized and heated and all those good things that are in the milk that could be destroyed by the heat. You get the benefit of those, the health benefit. Often people who are dairy farmers drink their own raw milk. Now, other people argue that the risk that there's some problem with the milk is so great that it is better to make everyone only have pasteurized milk. So that's really the controversy.
Liz, has food law always been a thing? Or is it a category of the legal world that has grown increasingly?
I think that there has always been a connection between food and law. However, it was always categorized as tort law, for example. And so if you fell in a restaurant or if you got food poisoning or whatever, that was a tort. And then there was immigration law that dealt with people who could come in and do certain work and labor issues and whatever in restaurants and factories. So then there was law that dealt with agriculture and the food bill, the farm bill, and all of that. And so it was never all put together as food law. So it existed, but it was buried in different categories. And today, I think with our recurring interest in food and the resurgence of interest in food, we tend to now also look at food law as a category instead of burying it in all these other categories.
Is it possible for someone to become a food lawyer to specialize in that category?
So there is at the University of Arkansas, at the law school there, a special master's degree in agricultural law. And that is something that other universities and law schools are looking at. And then you can become a specialist by simply limiting your practice to a certain sort of practice, like food and drug law, and you've worked for the FDA, and so you have that experience, or something like that. Or you only work with restaurants, and you know how to start the restaurant, all the food laws regarding health and safety that apply to a restaurant, and the labor issues that apply to a restaurant. So you can limit your practice, but except for going to get a master's degree in something like agricultural law, I don't believe that you can go and study food law.
So it hasn't become like maritime law, for instance, where that is a specific training that an attorney would have?
Not yet, no.
But I bet you see this on the horizon, possibly.
I do. I do think that you're finding in law school more and more courses called Food and the Law or something like that, that are being introduced into the general course of study. And that's the beginning. And so once that happens, then you might find more and more specialization that develops.
In conjunction, I assume, with the books that you published, you have actually been teaching a continuing education class in food law. Tell me about that and who comes to that class.
So you're right. We have worked in partnership with Tulane University Law School to have a number of continuing legal education classes all about food. So some of them have been food and drink. So we've had alcohol-based legal issues as well as food issues. It's just been great. We've had all kinds of lawyers who are either foodies and they're just interested in food, because we try to make sure that they have a good lunch and that, there's more to it than just listening to dry legal stuff. Also, we have people who are interested in going into those kinds of legal issues. So it's both. But it's fun because sometimes, as you can imagine, continuing legal education classes are just more boring than you can ever imagine. But it's a lot more fun when you can talk about the civil rights issues of obesity and things like that. That actually is interesting. Whereas if you're talking about, there are 37 types of bacteria that can cause food poisoning. They are, and then just list them. Of course, that's totally boring. So we try to avoid that and talk about all the interesting things.
Have there been any surprising moments in those seminars? Anybody who has come out of the seminars and you've seen a change in direction of their career? Do you have any testimonial tales for me?
Well, I do know that it has allowed people around the country who are involved in food law to meet each other. So it's turned into a way for people who are interested in food law to get to know other people in other parts of the country who are interested in food law. So that's been a fun thing. Another thing is that people who are interested in this are usually very interested in making it interesting. And so we've had one wonderful, wonderful presentation dealing with how to make kimchi and how kimchi is made traditionally versus how you have to make it in order to comply with food safety rules and how different those two things are. You might remember some of the problems around Creole cream cheese and the special rules that were required in order to make cheese and how the dairies just couldn't do it. So that's the kind of thing that you really see a lot of.
That's fascinating. So many restaurants today have house-made kimchi on their menus. I wonder if that's following the letter of the law. I bet not.
Well, but if it's house-made and they are serving it as opposed to selling it in a jar or something like that, it's probably okay. It's that shelf life portion of it that becomes much more difficult.
Liz, this is such a fascinating topic. Thank you so much for talking with us and filling us in on the mysteries of food law.
Happy to be here.
Liz Williams, founder of the Southern Food and Beverage Museum. When did the U.S. government first begin to legally regulate food, and why? Stay tuned, and we'll answer that question when we come right back. I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats, edible content for Louisiana food lovers. Louisiana Eats is brought to you with support from the St. Tammany Parish Tourist Commission. Located 40 minutes from New Orleans' French Quarter, the North Shore's Tammany Taste features the chefs and farmers, brewers and bakers of St. Tammany Parish's culinary scene. St. Tammany Parish is open again for business. Visit LouisianaNorthShore.com to discover more. Louisiana's North Shore, where New Orleans has come to play and get away for more than a century. And from Louisiana Fish Fry, whose Let's Sing Louisiana campaign resulted in the donation of 140,000 meals to local food banks. You can check out all the singing submissions at LouisianaFishFry.com. Louisiana Fish Fry. Dig into homemade Louisiana flavor. Here's this week's culinary quiz question, brought to you with support from Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. When did the U.S. government first begin to legally regulate food, and why? In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act, prohibiting interstate commerce in misbranded and adulterated foods, drinks, and drugs, a common problem in the early 20th century. The government agency tasked with enforcing this new law was the Bureau of Chemistry, the precursor of today's Food and Drug Administration. Interestingly, it was President Lincoln who created the position of head chemist in his newly created Department of Agriculture in 1862. I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats. Even before Prohibition banned the sales of all alcoholic beverages in the United States, one spirit had already been outlawed for 8 years. Absinthe, or the Green Fairy as it was commonly known, contained thujone, a compound that legislators believed was harmful to human health and caused hallucinations. Today we know that absinthe is no more dangerous than any other liquor. Its herbal infusions are harmless, but its high proof and bohemian reputation made it an easy target for the temperance movement. It wasn't until the 21st century that this illicit elixir regained its rightful place in American bar rooms. One person who played a crucial role in its return is the environmental chemist turned absinthe distiller, Ted Breaux. After spending years analyzing pre-Prohibition bottles, Ted successfully lobbied for legal absinthe in the U.S. by laying its myths to rest. When the New Orleans-born Absinthe Authority spoke with us in 2014, he recounted his experience resurrecting the world's most misunderstood spirit.
You know, the thing about it is I've studied absinthe for over 20 years now. And that's one of those words that just sort of maybe stuck somewhere in the back of my mind. And it was when I was working in a research lab 20 years ago, and a colleague of mine mentioned absinthe in a passing comment that it sort of struck a chord. And I asked him, I said, yeah, absinthe, what exactly was that? And he said, it's that green liquor that made people crazy. And my question to him was, really? I said, well, we analyze things for a living, so what was in it that made people crazy? Oh, I don't know, I could find very little information on it. I looked at my trusty Merck Index, which is like the Bible of chemistry. Every chemist has a copy of this book. And my special edition actually had an entry for absinthe in there, and it said, drinking absinthe can cause tremors, convulsions, death. Mm-hmm. I was like, what? Well, what? why? How could this stuff be so great and people loved it and yet it caused tremors? Something doesn't add up. And I don't like unsolved mysteries. And I wanted to know what was in this stuff. And back in those days, there wasn't any absinthe to be had.
No. What year was this?
This was in like 93, 94.
Okay.
And then in 2000, I became the first person to actually take samples from sealed vintage bottles of absinthe and analyze them using modern science.
Yeah, tell me that. You did something called mass spectrometry?
Mass spectrometry. And I realized that if there's something that's really wrong with this, there's something deleterious or hallucinogenic or psychoactive or something that's going to support the allegation, something there. It's there, and I'm going to see it.
Yes.
And I analyzed it, and I even sent samples to the lab of an associate, a third-party lab, had them analyze it. And we both came up with the same answer. There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing. Mm-hmm. Which was, wow, okay. Well, that just undermines all these allegations and years and decades of smear,
Well, they always thought it was the thujone levels, right?
Right. Well, that was the whole prevailing belief. But lo and behold, there was really none of this substance to be found. I mean, trace amounts that are so small, insignificant.
Wow.
And thujone isn't hallucinogenic. It doesn't have any recreational potential. That's all made up anyway. And I said, okay, I've analyzed these bottles. I can't find anything wrong with them. So what's the source of the controversy? And what I would eventually discover is that the answers wouldn't be found inside the bottle, but those answers were rooted in politics and economics and societal issues of the day. Today when we go out and buy a bottle of bourbon whiskey, to call something bourbon whiskey, it has to be produced in accordance to certain rules because there is a legal definition that defines what bourbon whiskey is.
Correct.
And without that, you could put anything in a bottle and call it bourbon. But fortunately, we have a definition, and that protects both consumers and the industry. Well, we do not have a definition for absinthe. Anyone can put anything in a bottle and call it absinthe, and there's nothing legally to stop them. And this is true not only here in the United States, but in Europe as well. And there is still a void of a legal standard of identity.
That is so interesting.
Well, back in the days of Upton Sinclair, when basically everything was caveat emptor, people in 19th century France, for example, were very brand conscious when it came to buying absinthe, and they had to be because there were so many. When absinthe became very, very popular, naturally there was a competitive drive to make it cheaper.
Yeah.
And there were profiteers who did exactly that. And they were using industrial alcohol, which is unfit for human consumption. They were artificially coloring it with copper sulfate. They were adding antimony trichloride, very poisonous, to make it artificially cloud when ice water was added because consumers expected that. These products were aimed at poor alcoholics. And it's these poor alcoholics that were drinking these really bad, adulterated, cheap versions of the drink. And they were the ones that were ending up with like symptoms of heavy metal poisoning, symptoms that were unlike normal alcoholism. And basically, the enemies of absinthe, and most notably at that point, the wine industry, there was a big economic incentive for them to blame all societal ills on absinthe. Never mind that you could just go out and freely buy products that contained opium and morphine and even heroin and cocaine. This wasn't a problem, you see, because, Sigmund Freud himself said that cocaine was a wonder drug. But absinthe was the real root of all societal ills. I came to a crossroads. I had all this information from analyzing vintage absinthe. And my first impulse was, I'm going to take this and write a book, which would be great. Yeah. And then I was like, well, wait a minute. But then you still have just a book. And I think what people really want is to taste vintage absinthe the way it tasted in the 19th century.
They want the drink.
So I said, here's what I'll do. I'll keep some of those details to myself. And what I'll do is I'll actually reproduce some of these original brands. I have the information to do it.
And so then you connect with Garrett Gerfine?
Yes.
He was your legal beagle who came along to help you because he wanted to make absinthe too, right?
He did, and he was working tirelessly as a lawyer, and he,
in
basically,
New York, right?
Yes, yeah.
So you all had a big geographical difference. Even.
Oh, we did. We were completely Mason-Dixon.
How did you all find each other?
Well, he found me because I was a subject of a really lovely article in the New Yorker. Basically, his proposal to me was, look, I can put the legal machine together to get your science in front of the U.S. government, and we can settle this once and for all. Because anyone that tried to bring an absinthe in the country at that point, they just said no.
Right.
And hoped that they would go away. And, of course, they did. And, we knew that we would have to be prepared to fight a battle of attrition. And it was quite interesting because the problem wasn't really with the juice, with the liquid. We could prove it was safe scientifically. They knew it was safe. They knew there was nothing wrong with it. Their concern was, what will consumers think? How will you market this? Are you going to market this like a drug? And it was quite interesting because I remember there was an energy drink that was on the market at that time. It wasn't on the market very long. And the brand name was cocaine.
I remember that.
You remember that?
Yeah.
It's like, now don't you think consumers would be somewhat disappointed when they find out there's no cocaine actually in it? So, our discussion with them was basically all about explaining that, look, we're not here to do what these profiteers have done and put these, mouthwash-like products in the market, slap a label on it that says absinthe and try and sell it as something that's going to create hallucinations, which is obviously a lie.
Yeah.
What we want to do is return absinthe to a respectable position on the bar as it was in every pre-prohibition bar. I mean, when you look at the most comprehensive bartending guide possibly in existence, the Savoy Cocktail Book, 1930, published in London, there are over 100 cocktails in that book that call for absinthe. And absinthe can be found in cocktails in every classic cocktail book prior to the ban. And that's where we wanted to return absinthe. And it took many months to convince the U.S. government. And that was March 5th, 2007, when they finally said, okay. And they allowed Lucid Absinthe Superior to become the first genuine absinthe sold in the United States since 1912. And it's been incident-free. So any fears that they had, whatever we've demonstrated, were completely unfounded.
Well, I read something very eloquent that I thought was really beautiful. You're New Orleans boy, and you're so familiar with all the various ways that the drink is served. So these days, when you see someone in New Orleans enjoying an absinthe frappe, one of the things that you dreamed of bringing back, how does that make you feel?
Well, that makes me feel... here's what I want to see. New Orleans was the epicenter of absinthe in North America back in the day. And I feel that it deserves that title again. And I really feel that absinthe should be something that you find everywhere here in New Orleans. And you do find in a lot of places. But, absinthe and absinthe cocktails and New Orleans cocktails that call for absinthe, really should be promoted well in this city. This city deserves that.
Absinthe makes your heart grow fonder.
Researcher, scientist, and absinthe authority Ted Breaux, the man who helped bring the Green Ferry back home to New Orleans.
I can't have you, you're so illegal, intoxicating to me. Where else can we go to find out if it's ice and booze or gin and juice, rum and rendezvous? And I'm not missing you. I'm not even missing you.
That's it for this week's edition of Louisiana Eats, edible content for Louisiana food lovers. You can catch up on previous editions of Louisiana Eats on poppytooker.com, where we have 10 years of Louisiana Eats editions available for pod and webcasting, along with recipes and videos too. Louisiana Eats is made possible with major support from Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen, Louisiana Fish Fry, Camellia Brand Beans, and the St. Tammany Parish Tourist Commission. Additional support for Louisiana Eats is provided by the Palace Cafe, located in the historic Werline Music Building on Canal Street, now open for indoor and outdoor dining Tuesday through Sunday with brunch served weekends. Original theme music composed by David Pomerleau and performed by Johnny Sketch and the Dirty Notes. Big thanks to senior producer Joe Schreiner and special projects manager Reggie Morris, and to our business manager and social media maven, Maddie Mullidew. Catch up with us anytime on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook too. Louisiana Eats is a production of Poppy Tooker Broadcasting.